Sorry, start again.
What? Welcome to the live stream of the Toronto Star's editorial board meeting with Mike Schreiner, leader of the Green Party of Ontario. This is the first in a series of meetings with the party leaders running in Ontario's elections, and this is the first time we've opened an editorial board up to the public in this format. My name is Carrie Gillespie. I'm the deputy editorial page editor. Welcome, Mike Schreiner.
Thank you.
This is a busy time for you, and we appreciate you making the time to be here.
My pleasure, and it's kind of an honor to be your historic first in this format.
So we'll start by going around the table to introduce ourselves, and then we'll invite you to give some opening remarks, and after that we'll head into questions, both our own and some submitted by readers and the audience. And we'll run the meeting for about an hour.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm Jordan Himmelfarb, I'm the politics editor.
I'm Diane Reinhardt, I'm on the editorial board.
Great.
My name's David Beer, I'm a team editor, I work with Jordan.
Great.
I'm Barry Grumbacon, I'm a team editor on Politics Desk as well. I'm Patrick Ho, I'm a digital in charge of rewrite.
Great.
I'm Natasha Grzinsich, digital news lead.
I'm Jim Coyle, I'm on the editorial board for now.
Great. Nice to meet all of you and be reacquainted with those who I already know.
That's great. Well, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, sure. So I'm incredibly excited because the Green Party is offering people a new way of doing politics. And we've seen elected Greens around the world and across Canada, and particularly in Canada now, 2 elected Greens in PEI, 1 in New Brunswick, obviously Elizabeth May federally, and 3 Green MLAs in British Columbia holding the balance of responsibility in a minority government. And I think what elected Greens around the country and across the world are showing is that we can do politics differently. And that's what the Green Party of Ontario is offering this election, people-powered change, because I think it is a change election. And as I knock on doors in my home riding in Guelph and I meet with people across the province, they're telling me that they are tired of the political status quo. And in particular, people are saying, you know what, we're tired of the party that's been governing the province in the last 15 years. And we don't have a lot of confidence in the other establishment party that's shown it's had trouble governing itself in the last 3 months, let alone the province. And the third party's been absent on a number of big issues that deeply concern Greens in particular, and especially I think addressing the climate crisis, the need to transform our economy and our healthcare system, and the need to be innovative in how we address social justice issues. And I believe that that's what our platform about how we'll create jobs that put people and planet first delivers. And I'm really looking forward to, as we go through today's conversation, going through the details of that platform and our vision book, which people can find at gpo.ca vision, which gives you a comprehensive look on a wide range of issues of how Greens would move this province forward. And I guess my final point would be that this is a change election, but the question is what kind of change do people want? Do you want to go backwards? Do you want to go forwards? Do you want to cut or do you want to invest in Ontario? And Greens believe that we want to create a bridge to the future, a bridge that we can walk across with confidence and compassion to leave a livable legacy for our children, our grandchildren, and the next 7 generations. And that's what's at stake in this election. And that's the change that Greens will bring to Queen's Park. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today.
Thank you. You opened with this, and I know it's in your platform as well, this idea that it's time to do politics differently. That's sort of kind of one of those things that one says, but what does it actually mean? Like, what are concrete examples of what you mean by that?
So I think the first leaders debate is an example of how we need to do politics differently. I felt the 3 leaders spent more time tearing each other down than they did in talking about how we can build Ontario up. And let me give you some concrete examples of how we do politics differently. In the 2014 election, I was really proud of the fact that I brought all 4 party candidates, including the incumbent cabinet minister, together to do a news conference to protect Guelph's water from a local quarry that threatens our water. And so many pundits told me, Mike, why would you do that? You've owned that issue. Why would you bring the other 3 parties in on it? And I said, you know what? It's more important for me to do what's good for the people of Ontario, or in this case, my fellow neighbors in Guelph, than it is to actually put my own political self-interest first. And so protecting Guelph's water is more important to me than scoring political points on a particular issue that, quote, I've led on. Another example of that is in 2016, and I'll give a shout out to the Star on this. We led the charge to get big money out of politics, and I know Martin Rich Cohen here at the Star did a lot of work on that issue as well. But I worked incredibly hard with the Premier, with Andrew Horwath, and with Patrick Brown, who's the leader of the Conservative Party at that time, to get all 4 parties to agree to ban corporate and union donations to political parties and to lower donation limits, because I think that's good for our democracy. And it's that ability to try to find common ground, and of course political parties are going to disagree on issues, but to try to find areas where we do agree and we can put people first ahead of our own political self-interest. I think it's that kind of collaborative politics that people are looking for instead of the divisive politics around wedge issues. I want to give you one more example that's a hot button issue in Ontario right now, and that's the issue around raising the minimum wage. We support raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and we also support providing small businesses with lower payroll taxes so they can afford to pay a higher minimum wage and they can afford to create more jobs. So in a sense, you have the Conservative leader saying, you know what, workers don't deserve $15 an hour, and people working full-time shouldn't have above poverty level wages. But you also have the Premier pitting workers against local business owners, and both parties are trying to create a wedge issue out of this, and that's oftentimes how politics is done today. You want to create wedge issues to harvest votes, and we've said, you know what, let's create a win-win situation here. Let's raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and let's lower payroll taxes on small businesses to provide them with immediate cash flow relief so they can afford to pay their employees higher wages. To me, that's a win-win situation that works for workers, for small business owners, and for local economies. So that's what I mean when I talk about doing politics differently.
We have a question from Reddit.
Sure.
Sorry, in the last few elections, it's looked like the Green Party has taken some serious effort to build a very real policy platform, like beyond sort of the environmental platform you're known for. And they're saying these are the kind of things that people would love if it was put forward by one of the bigger parties. What do you think is preventing the Green Party from being taken seriously in winning ridings and getting more votes?
Yeah, so I think we are being taken seriously. I mean, the fact that we are running a full slate of candidates, and we have in every election since 2003. And by the way, 52% of our candidates are women, so we're very proud of the fact that we're bringing more diverse voices and faces to the table. I think the fact that Greens are being elected across Canada is a game changer. You know, historically, people have said, you know, we love the Green Party's vision. We love your policies. As a matter of fact, it seems like if you want to see where Ontario might be in 10 years from now, look at the Green Party's platform, because a lot of the things we were talking about 10 or 15 years ago, the other 3 establishment parties are starting to talk about now. So if you don't want to have to wait that long, maybe you should start voting Green now. But I think the fact that, you know, we have 3 Green MLAs in British Columbia showing how a minority government can work and work effectively. We have 2 Greens in PEI now, and the PEI Greens are polling number 2 in PEI, and actually in their next election talking about either forming possibly official opposition or even forming government if things go their way. The fact that the New Brunswick Greens have a seat in our David Kuhn, actually I'll be campaigning with him later today at home in Guelph. He's talking about 2 to 3 additional seats as well. So Greens are being elected. Elected Greens are showing people that Greens can deliver on doing politics differently, concretely in the legislature. And I think it's now time for that green wave that's going across Canada will land in Ontario in this election, and we will elect our first Green MPP as well.
If you're just joining us now, this is a live stream with the Toronto Star's editorial board meeting with Mike Schreiner, leader of the Ontario Green Party. Just one more question from a Reddit user. As an NDP supporter, I'd like to know why Greens don't support the party that has traditionally been the eco party instead of splintering the left eco vote. NDP environmental policies would probably be improved with the inclusion of the Greens.
Well, I would disagree that the NDP has been the eco party. And if you actually look at the NDP platform, its environmental policies are very sparse and not very strong, quite frankly. And I think one of the challenges the NDP faces is does the NDP want to leap into the future and embrace 21st century clean economy jobs, or do they want to cling to the past and try to hang on to old economy jobs? And my sense is they haven't resolved that, and Greens are incredibly clear. We want to embrace the clean economy. We see the global opportunity in the low carbon economy, a $6 trillion opportunity. If Ontario even captures 1% of that, that would be a larger contribution to our GDP than even the auto sector. And so that's why we're pushing so hard to redirect Ontario's business support programs, the over $3 billion we currently spend, to put criteria in place that money can only support businesses that are in the clean sector, who want to scale up and commercialize and help Ontario be a global leader in the clean economy, or help businesses lower their GHG emissions so we can be a global leader in the clean economy. Already in Canada today, 274,000 Canadians work in the clean energy sector with an average salary of $92,000 a year. Those are good middle class jobs. If we're going to replace the lost manufacturing jobs that we've lost over the last 2 decades, it's clear to me that it's in the clean economy, bioproducts, advanced manufacturing, renewable energy, clean water technologies, a whole range of new innovations. I don't think the NDP fully understands that, and so I would disagree with the premise of the question. The other thing that I think is important too is on a number of social justice issues. I would argue the Green Party is leading. So we are proposing that Ontario actually bring in a basic income guarantee, and we would start immediately by raising social assistance rates in Ontario up to what the basic income pilot is currently in Ontario right now. And you know what? Another way I do politics differently is, I'm going to compliment the Liberal government, which is something you don't hear opposition party leaders say often. I'm going to compliment the Liberal government for bringing in the basic income pilot. I thought it was a good move, but I'm also going to challenge both the Liberal government and the other 3 establishment parties that we can't hide behind the basic income pilot to avoid addressing poverty right now. And so the $3.5 billion down payment we would put on the table to bring up social assistance rates, which have never recovered from the cuts that the Harris government brought in the 1990s. And I'm seriously concerned about the kind of cuts that could be possible if one particular party wins this election. But anyway, and we were going to be clear with you how we'd pay for it. We would cancel the Liberals' unfair hydro plan, the most expensive Band-Aid in Ontario's history, the same unfair hydro plan that the Conservatives support, and at least the HST component of that is supported by the NDP as well. And here's the bottom line. If you do an across-the-board 25% cut on people's electricity bills, one, it's only going to happen before the election, and bills are going to go up after the election, as the Financial Accountability Officer has pointed out. But the other thing is it primarily benefits the wealthy. Because if you look at energy use by income category, and it makes sense, the wealthy use the most energy, larger houses, more electronics, et cetera, et cetera. So if you use FAO data, the 25% reduction for a high income electricity use, that 25% reduction almost equals what lower income users of electricity spend on their entire bill. So essentially, we are cutting taxes for the wealthy, and so what we would say is let's not do that, and let's help the people who need the help by raising social assistance rates now and moving towards a basic income guarantee, which in today's economy with increasing levels of precarious work, temporary work, contract jobs, the fact that more and more people are moving into becoming entrepreneurs. So in that type of an economy, having basic economic security by having a basic income guarantee, I think is essential from a social justice perspective, but it's also essential from an an economic perspective as well. And then the final point I want to make on this is the biggest category in Ontario's budget is the healthcare budget. And all 3 of the status quo parties talk about pouring more money into hospitals. And yes, we need more investment in our hospitals. We need to reduce wait times, hallway medicine, etc. But a party has to come along and talk about transforming our healthcare system. And that's what the Green Party is talking about by investing in preventing illness and promoting health through primary care reform and making primary care the foundation of our healthcare sector, expanding nurse-led practitioner clinics, family health teams, community care centers, Aboriginal healthcare centers, expanding mental health services, making sure we have enough long-term care beds in place. Because if you talk to hospital administrators and emergency room doctors and nurses, they will tell you that a lot of the backlog is that people are coming into hospital who would be better cared for in the community if they could access those services. So particular seniors who are looking for assisted living or long-term care spaces, or people with mental health and addiction need, that can't receive the care they need in the community. And so that kind of transformation of our healthcare system, I think, is the only way that we're going to have sustainability in our healthcare system and will improve care. So I think we have a better plan on the environment. I think we have a better plan on the economy, and I think we have a better plan on social services and social justice as well.
I had a little trouble squaring the vision document on your website, the media reports on your platform,
Okay,
with
sure.
The costing that your agency
Sure.
sent me. So I'd just like to ask a few questions to clarify where you in fact stand on a few issues. So first of all, in this costing that I was given, it says that your fiscal plan supports expansion of pharmacare, dental care, child care, tuition support, health care, home care, long-term care, and other programs outlined in the 2018 provincial budget. Then in the document itself, none of those programs are actually mentioned. So am I to understand that you support all of those programs as outlined in the budget?
Yeah, so the funding aspect of those programs, yes. So we would tinker with and possibly change some of the details around them, but the funding outline, yes. And so what we wanted to do with this, and this with our fiscal plan, was to show where we deviate from the 2018 provincial budget, to show where we would save money, to show where we would raise additional revenue, to show where we would reallocate money or redirect money. And that's how we wanted to deliver our fiscal plan. And we primarily did that because we know that we're going to be an opposition party. And so we wanted to show what are out of all the policies we have in our vision book, what are the 9 policies that we want to commit to as an opposition party that we are going to fight for, and how are we going to fund them? And we also wanted to show people that it is possible to expand social programs in Ontario and to have an honest conversation with people how to pay for them. And that's why we wanted to outline our fiscal plan and the way we've done it.
Would you leave cap and trade in place?
Yeah, so we would phase out cap and trade. So our concerns with cap and trade are that, one, the 150 largest GHG polluters in Ontario are exempted from the Liberals' carbon pricing structure in their cap and trade. And that is a common element of cap and trade programs that you've seen in the EU and around the world, where it creates a very bureaucratic and complex structure that people who are well connected can oftentimes lobby for exemptions. But we also recognize that you're not going to be able to cancel it right away. Like, that would be completely irresponsible for us to suggest that. So we are proposing a 5-year phase out and a replacement with what we believe and what many economists believe is a more effective GHG pricing mechanism. That's carbon fee and dividend. So we would start with a higher price on GHG emissions, and then the money collected, we would return back to the people of Ontario as a dividend check, much like how people received HST rebate checks. That then does 2 things, actually 3 things that are critically important. So one, it helps us get carbon pricing or GHG pricing to a level that's high enough to affect consumer behavior and business behavior. It helps people with modest and middle incomes adjust to the transition to a low carbon economy in a way that doesn't significantly impact their budgets, because we know that lower income people, even though they spend less on consumer goods and on carbon intensive goods, it's a higher disproportionate part of their income. And then it also provides people with the resources to invest in ways that they can lower their GHG emissions. They can, you can buy a bike, you can buy an electric vehicle, you can retrofit your home, you can buy a monthly transit pass. You have that additional money to do that. So then you can even save more because you are saving on your reductions in your GHGs as well. So the more you save, the actual more you end up with in your pocketbook.
For those who are just joining us, we, the Star editorial board, and some editors and writers at the Star are talking to Ontario Green Party leader Mike Schreiner, talking now about carbon pricing. And Mr. Schreiner was just explaining that over a 5-year period, the Green Party would phase out Ontario's cap and trade system and phase in a revenue neutral carbon tax.
Carbon fee and dividend is what it's generally called. Yeah.
But it's a tax.
Well, it depends on how you define a tax, actually. And so I don't want to get into semantics here, but usually a tax is something that raises additional revenue for government. In this case, we're actually putting a price on GHG pollution and returning that back to the people of Ontario as a dividend check.
Right. So you mentioned economists and their view on carbon taxing, but most economists that I've read argue that in order for a carbon tax to change behavior, it would have to be quite a bit higher than anything that politicians are talking about today. And so systems like Ontario's current system, which take the price on carbon and reinvest it in green initiatives, are often favored in the absence of a sufficiently high carbon tax. So I'm wondering if you're not going to set the fee high enough to change behavior, and if you're going to give that money back, what's the point?
We have to set the fee high enough. So we would start at $50 a ton and ramp it up to $150 a ton over the next decade. And actually, you'd have to probably do it faster than that, but within the next decade, you'd be up to $150 a ton, starting at $50 a ton. Okay. We saw in British Columbia when they brought in even a carbon tax starting at $10 a ton, they saw an immediate drop in GHG emissions, and their economy actually did better. The reason their progress on combating climate change stopped was they froze it at $30 a ton and didn't keep going up. And so that's why consistently going up, let's say 10% a year, is that sends the signal to the marketplace for people to know to make investments in lowering their carbon footprint. The challenge I have with the Liberal plan is, yes, they do reinvest some money back into ways in which government can support carbon reductions. We do that as well, and I can outline the ways in which we do it. We do it differently, but they also spend a lot of money undermining all of that because they're still investing so much in the old economy, which is exactly why we're calling for redirecting all of Ontario's business support programs as an example. Because it's like, so you spend a little bit of money helping businesses transition to the low carbon economy, but then you spend billions over here helping to maintain the old economy and completely undermining the work you're doing to help people reduce their carbon footprint. We want to end that contradiction.
And just one more policy question. You say that you want to lower payroll taxes.
Yes.
So that businesses can afford the minimum wage.
That's right. Yes.
Payroll taxes, the combined payroll taxes Canadians pay are lower than the international average by quite a bit. Is it your view that businesses cannot afford the minimum wage increase without a payroll tax reduction?
Yeah, so if you spend as much time talking to small business owners as I do, a number of small business owners have experienced significant cash flow crunch and are experiencing that right now because the minimum wage went up rapidly. And our belief is that by increasing the employer health tax exemption, you will provide immediate cash flow relief for those businesses to be able to afford not only the current minimum wage increase, but the minimum wage increase that we support to $15 an hour. And ultimately, I think we need to raise the minimum wage to a living wage, which is actually higher than $15 an hour. And providing small businesses with that cash flow relief will help them manage that transition and be able to afford the higher minimum wage and also increase their payroll as well and grow their businesses as well. And we think that's the way that's going to benefit our local economies the most. Because if you have workers with modest incomes earning a higher income through a higher minimum wage, those workers tend to spend that money in their communities and supporting that local economy. When you support small businesses and help them with their cash flow, small businesses spend that money in their local communities as well. They're the ones who, buy the local paper, advertise with local businesses, hire local accountants and lawyers and other business supports. And that then injects more money into our local economies, benefiting both businesses and workers. And by the way, it's also not just small businesses, it's nonprofit associations as well. So a number of nonprofit organizations have approached us as well because they're experiencing cash flow crunch with the increase in the minimum wage as well. And lowering their payroll taxes through the employer health tax exemption supports those nonprofits and social enterprises as well.
You say you're an opposition party, so you don't expect to become premier next time.
I think that's a fair statement.
Okay.
I mean, I could become premier, but I believe in honesty, and I think it would be hard to say we're going to go from 0 seats to me being premier.
Okay, so in the spirit of honesty, which party would you like to see elected, if not your own?
You know what? I think that's up to the people of Ontario to decide, not to me. I have made it clear, though, and I was asked this at Queen's Park yesterday, that if we are in a minority government situation and, I'm elected as a Green MPP or we have a few Green MPPs, we would enter into negotiations with any party that aligns with the commitments we've outlined in our platform commitments document. And on top of that, I think we need to have a serious conversation in Ontario about proportional representation. And so one of the things that I have found encouraging with the discussions that's happened with the BC NDP and the BC Greens, as they've formed as the BC Greens have supported the NDP and the minority government there, is that they're going to be bringing forward a referendum this fall on proportional representation, because I think we need to change our voting system. And so our commitment would be to work with any party around the 9 commitments we've outlined in our platform and proportional representation.
I'm going to ask a question from that we got through Twitter.
Sure.
The Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act is a landmark piece of legislation. Does your party have any specific policies to promote and achieve accessibility and inclusion for people with disabilities?
It is a landmark piece of legislation, and it's exciting that Ontario has a vision to be fully accessible by 2025. My fear is, and I believe the Stars reported on this with as well as others, that Ontario is not on track to achieve our accessibility goals by 2025. And 2025, sometimes may seem a ways away, but it's not that far away right at this point. And so we are actually proposing an independent commission to basically come up with specific recommendations of how we can achieve our accessibility goals, because we're not on track to do it right now. And my fear is if government doesn't act on that now, we're going to be in a situation where, in 4 years, we're going to be scrambling and saying we're not going to achieve this goal. And so I think we have to be forward-looking right now to figure out the plan and the pathway to achieving it.
I just wanted to follow up on Jordan's earlier question too on the cap and trade. It's not just economists who have said that this is the best system. The Ontario Environment Commissioner has also weighed in with that view. And your point about putting money back into taxpayers' pockets so they can go out and buy a bicycle, well, there's no proof that they would. So isn't it better for the government to take all that money, the $2.4 billion that they've raised so far, and put it into green projects? It has more of a snowball effect.
Yeah, well, first of all, we're proposing a $4.1 billion green building and business fund, which will exceed the amount actually being proposed through the cap and trade revenues to help businesses and homeowners and renters retrofit their buildings and bring in more energy efficient equipment for their businesses to, one, not only lower their greenhouse gas emissions, but also to help them save money by saving energy, because energy efficiency and conservation is our lowest cost solution. We are proposing a dedicated fund for walking and cycling infrastructure by reorientating the breakdown of our transportation infrastructure budget to dedicate 5%. Right now, 0% of our transportation budget is actually dedicated to safe streets, making our streets safer for walking and cycling. There is a bit of money from the cap and trade revenue that provides that. So we feel like there are numerous ways in which government can support the transition to a low carbon economy. The reason we cap the fee and dividend, and there's dueling economists on this, including the previous environment commissioner actually preferred something like fee and dividend or a carbon tax, and then the current environment commissioner has said prefers cap and trade. So you can go back and forth on this. I think the reality is to get carbon pricing up to $150 a ton, which is where we really need to be. To sell that politically to people, I think you have to put some of that back in people's pockets to help them manage the transition. And our plan will help people manage the transition, especially people with lower incomes, modest incomes, and lower middle class incomes. Because the reality is as energy gets more expensive, we're going to have to support people in that transition. I think it's the socially just way to go. And with carbon fee and dividend, you don't create these complex bureaucratic structures that lead to things like what's happening now, where the 150 largest GHG emitters are exempted from the carbon price. And I don't think that's right, and that wouldn't happen with fee and dividend. And you'd have lower government administrative costs associated with it, because you would just directly put the price on its source instead of having to create a whole new trading bureaucracy, which I know is good for Bay Street traders and lawyers and accountants, but I'd rather see that money go to people to help them manage the transition and make their own personal investments in lowering their GHG emissions.
Okay. You mentioned that there's been a green wave across Canada and around the world. Your party has been around since 1983 in Ontario. Why has no one been elected so far?
Yeah, you know what? It's hard to be an agent of change sometimes, but I think our time has come. And, Iceland just elected a green prime minister. The most conservative province in Germany now, the province that's the heart of the German auto sector, very similar economic base to what Ontario has, now has a green premier. In Canada, over the last 5 years, we've seen Greens being elected in legislatures across Canada, and I think part of it is people fundamentally realize now that we have to take action on the climate crisis. And I know there is a backlash against that among some conservative politicians who either want to deny climate change or just pretend that we don't have to deal with it. But I think the vast majority of people in Ontario know we have to deal with the crisis. And not dealing with the crisis will actually be more expensive than actually addressing it. Last year alone, extreme weather events across Canada cost $4.9 billion in insurable losses. Floods, mostly floods, but floods, droughts, forest fires, etc. Those costs are only going to escalate. And so if we don't take action, it's going to hit all of us in our pocketbooks. I mean, if you talk to Insurance Bureau of Canada now, the number one driver of people's increases in people's home insurance is extreme weather events caused by climate change. It's not fires is what it used to be, but it's actually climate change. We are paying the price. And then the other point is that I think increasingly people are tired of the status quo way of doing politics. I think they really are. And the fact that Greens are offering a new way of doing politics, and I'm sure this will come up, but yesterday I would say the most controversial thing I said is that we support road pricing. And Twitter exploded yesterday when I said that. But you know what? After decades of politicians promising to build transit, and we're starting to see a little bit more built, but we are so far behind. And we can't build the infrastructure we need to create world-class cities, to connect our communities across Ontario, if we don't have an honest conversation with people about how to pay for it. And again, in this case, every expert recommendation, Board of Trade, Golden Report, Metrolinx report have all said road pricing has to be an essential component of allocating road space efficiently, but also raising the revenue we need to build world-class transit. And we're willing to have that honest conversation. And I've had so many people tell me, you know what, we may not agree with you on that policy, but we admire you for telling it like it is, and just being straight with people about the challenges we face and the actions it's going to take to address those challenges. And I think people are tired of politicians who are not going to be straight with them. And so this is an opportunity for people to say, if you want honest government, you have to vote for people who are going to be honest with you.
My last question is just, you mentioned earlier on that you have 52% of your candidates are female.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if that was by design, or you go out and actually try to bring women into the party.
Absolutely. We very proactively reached out and recruited more women candidates. We also working hard to have more ethnic and racial diversity in our candidates, and also diversity by age as well. So you also see we have a number of young candidates, but we also have a number of candidates who are nearing their retirement age, as well as in between. And so we explicitly set out to have as diverse group of candidates as we possibly could, because we felt that we wanted our full slate of 124 candidates to be representative of Ontario. And so we're working hard to make that happen. And we're proud of the fact that we do have over 50% of our candidates are women.
If you're just joining us now, this is the live stream of the Toronto Star's editorial board meeting with Mike Schreiner, the leader of the Green Party of Ontario. I'm just going to ask a question from one of our Reddit users. This comes from an educator who believes that we need to educate today's generation to be better prepared for the future by thinking of green energy and helping solve the problem of climate change. How do you see the Green Party impacting education in our province to help today's generation become better prepared for that future?
Yeah, so I think a number of ways. And first of all, I think we just have to recognize that we need more investment in our education system. And one of the reasons we are advocating for changes to the funding formula for education is that we don't believe the formula has ever recovered from the Harris years. And so much of the formula now it's based more on population and not on need. And so oftentimes programming for special needs in particular, but also for things like outdoor education, library services, physical education, music and arts are all underfunded in our schools. And so changing the funding formula so we can bring in the kind of programming you're talking about, I think is critically important. I think a lot of people, particularly parents, would be shocked if they knew how much violence is taking place in our schools and actually being directed at teachers. And I don't mean violence in like a criminal way, but I mean just students with special needs who are not getting the supports they need and are then acting out in classrooms in inappropriate ways. So if you talk to all the teachers unions, they will talk about the disruptions that are happening in our classrooms and how important it is to address that. I also think we need to start having a conversation. I know the Green Party is the only party talking about this, a conversation of how we end duplication in our school boards. I would like to see less money spent on duplicate administration, busing, and buildings, and have that money redirected to our classrooms. Hire more teachers, hire more education assistants, hire more special ed assistants. And so integrating our public school boards so we have a single public system of French and English, I think it's the direction we have to go. And I think that integration of our systems is a conversation that needs to start now, because we need to ensure that we do it in a way that doesn't create disruptions in our classrooms and basically brings in the best of the separate school system and the best of the public system to create one world-class, high-quality public system.
You're talking about ending Catholic.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you know what? And I've been meeting with OECTA in particular, the Catholic Teachers Union, to really, particularly in my home community of Guelph, to really start that conversation, because I don't want that conversation to be part of a wedge issue. Does that make sense? Even though I know it's controversial, so that's why I think it's so important to start having the conversation now. Quebec has shown how it can be done. Newfoundland and Labrador has shown how it can be done, and I think Ontario can learn from those examples, and we can improve the funding and quality of education, and we can start integrating and bringing students together in our communities.
Highly unlikely scenario, but let's say you win your seat.
Yes.
And it's a narrow minority government for the Tories. Would you be open, if you held the balance of power, to forming a coalition with either or both of the NDP or the Liberals?
Well, first of all, I will have to disagree with one premise of your question. I don't think winning a seat in Guelph is highly unlikely.
I didn't mean that. I meant
yeah. Okay. Because I actually think that I'm well positioned to win in Guelph, and I've been such a strong voice for Guelph and a champion for Guelph. And Guelph is led on so many issues that are near and dear to the Green Party, and I want to bring that to Queen's Park. So I think that opportunity is very strong. In the case that there is a minority government, I'm at this point not going to engage in any speculation of who we would work with, because I think every party right now is working to elect as many members as they're going to elect. But I will just reiterate what I said earlier, that our negotiation in any sort of minority government situation would be based on our 9 priorities, as well as what's in our vision book. But these are our 9 top priorities of everything that's outlined in our vision book. And for me, proportional representation and changing our voting system would be a critically important part of that negotiation and those conversations.
So when you say critically important, Mike, do you mean is that a deal breaker?
I won't go so far as to say it's a deal breaker right now, because I don't want to mislead people, and I'll be honest, I don't want to paint myself into a corner that I can't get out of. Because I think in that situation discussions are going to be fluid. But it is right at the top of our priority list. Because part of what it is can I just quickly do a little advocacy for PR here, even though I know that wasn't the question. And the reason this is so important is I want to live in a province where every vote counts. And I think one of the most inspiring promises the Prime Minister made in the last election was to end first past the post voting. And I can't tell you how many people, particularly young voters, millennials especially, were so bitterly disappointed when the Prime Minister did not deliver on that. And I think people are finding inspiration in what's happening in BC. I'd like to see that same inspiration happen here. And this isn't something that's about just benefiting the Green Party. And I know a lot of people say, oh, you're just in this for yourselves, because there would be 8 or 9 MPPs in Ontario if we have a proportional representation. But I look at a Liberal voter in one of the Ontario rural ridings that's been conservative for the last 100 years. Those Liberal voters oftentimes feel like, well, my vote doesn't count. Why should I bother voting? I never elect anybody who represents, my values or my view. And you could say the same thing about a Conservative voter in, a downtown Toronto riding like the one we're in right now, that typically is either gone Liberal or NDP, feeling as if their vote doesn't count. So it's really about how do we create a voting system where every vote counts, and where we can start. And I think if we have a system where every vote counts, you're going to start seeing our voter turnout numbers go up. The fact that only 51% of people voted in the last election and only 49% voted in the previous election shows such a disengagement from our electoral system, and I think it's a dangerous disengagement. And so I think we need to come up with solutions that are going to re-engage and re-inspire people to become part of the political process. I think PR is one of those solutions.
We're getting a lot of questions on YouTube about fiscal responsibility.
Okay.
So what is your party's position on deficit spending and the responsibility of the province to have a plan to return to balance?
Yeah. So I think any party that believes in social justice, and I know it's going to turn things upside down a little bit, any party who believes in social justice and good public services should have a plan to get Ontario back to balance in good economic times. And part of the reason is we spend $1 billion a month right now on interest payments. That's $1 billion a month I want to go to education and better healthcare, better transit, better public services. So for me, fiscal responsibility is not about austerity, but about investing in public services, okay? We, in our fiscal plan, don't get us back to balance. We propose a plan that is about, with a deficit, 1/3 of what the Liberals have projected. And part of that is we've had successive NDP, Conservative, and Liberal governments all contribute to Ontario's growing budget deficit. So no one party wears this. I mean, the Liberals wear most of it, but all three do. And so we have structural issues fiscally in Ontario that make it challenging to get it back to balance. And so that's why we've proposed ways to raise additional revenue and to save money. And so some of our ways of raising additional revenues, we think the taxes on the largest corporations should go up by 1.5%. The Liberals have cut it by 1.5% over the last few years. If we raise it by 1.5%, Ontario still has competitive corporate tax rates. That's about, that's almost $2 billion. Once you go to the full 1.5%, it's like $1.78 billion of additional revenue for healthcare and education and better public services that I think is essential. One of the reasons we want to follow the expert recommendations on how to fund transportation and transit, parking levies, road pricing, land value taxes, is because that revenue is essential to pay for the transit we need to buy. Either the transit's not going to be built, or it's going to be built via debt and just increase interest rates. And so I think we have to have an honest conversation about paying for the transportation infrastructure we need. We've also identified ways that we can save money. Our biggest one is canceling the unfair hydro plan. I've sort of explained why we would do that. I think it's bad government policy. I mean, it actually undermines our efforts to reduce GHG pollution, and it does nothing to address why electricity prices are going up. It just delays the pain, and the pain will even be more severe in a few years. And the debt it creates is going to cost us big time and take money away from good public services. And so that's why I think it's so critically important to talk about ways to save money and raise additional revenue.
What are some other ways to save money from your perspective?
Yeah, so one of the ways we've in there is like, why is Ontario subsidizing jet fuel, which is something the Environment Commissioner has been calling for us ending for years now. Also, we are, according to the 2012 Drummond Commission report, we are leaving money on the table when it comes to user fees. So as an example, water taking fees. The current water taking fees, according to the ECO office, only recovers about 1.5% of the cost. And so if we would just raise water taking fees to cover 100% of the cost, that would be a way for Ontario to save money, because that money then would be self-paying, right? The Drummond Commission's also identified ways in which the underground economy leads to tax avoidance. And so, to the Commission's credit, they came up with about $1.5 billion of ways in which Ontario could actually save money if we address that. We've projected about $500 million in our fiscal projection, because we're not confident we can get completely to the 1.5 billion, but we think to get to 500 million a year is pretty reasonable. And one of the reasons, as I've mentioned, that we want to start the conversation about integrating our school boards is that we want to free up that revenue, not to take away from education, but to actually invest it in our classrooms, supporting teachers and students.
Mike, how do you reconcile the fact that while you're trying to get voters to look toward a 21st century economy, across the continent there seem to be a lot of eyeballs attracted by leaders pitching a 1950s economy? You've got a guy south of the border who wants to make coal king again.
Right.
You've got a leader in this party who wants to rip wind turbines out of the ground. And they speak of some they have some nostalgia for some bygone golden age that they want to go backwards to instead of going forward. Do you find the headwinds to be sometimes too strong to overcome in that respect?
Well, you know what? Let's put this into perspective, Jim. If we don't embrace a modern economy, we're going to be set back economically. So what Mr. Trump is proposing in the United States and what Mr. Ford is proposing in Ontario is the equivalent of 100 years ago if Ontario had doubled down on horse carriages and buggy whips and hadn't embraced the auto sector. Imagine what kind of province we live in today, because the auto sector has generated so much of our economic prosperity. So if we had taken a Doug Ford approach, we wouldn't be the prosperous province we are today. Today's embracing of what was the automobile 100 years ago is the clean economy. And so, you know, the great one was the great one because he skated to where the puck is going and not where it's been. And I'm sorry, if Doug Ford wants to duke it out in the boards over yesterday's economy, I want to skate to where the puck is because I want Ontario to lead the world in the transition to a low carbon economy, because that's where the jobs are, and that's what we're going to fight for. And I know there's some headwinds there, but that is why, you know, I'm so passionate. That's why I'm working so hard to get that message out there that 274,000 Canadians work in clean. That's just clean energy alone. That isn't even all the other ways in which the clean economy is emerging. I'm going to fight to keep those jobs, and I'm going to fight to create more of those jobs, because that's where the prosperity is going to come from moving forward.
By my arithmetic, you're now the second longest serving leader of a political party in Ontario. Just
That's
a few
right.
months behind Andrea Horvath, both of you winning leaderships in 2009. You outlasted right. Tim Hudak. All things considered, how do you keep going?
Yeah, you know, it's passion and hope. I refuse to let my children grow up in a world that's dominated by floods, droughts, hurricanes, forest fires, just the economic and social and human risk associated with the climate crisis. And I'm going to fight and fight and fight in every way I can to prevent that from happening. And I've done it as a small business owner and creating, you know, one of Ontario's first local organic food companies in Guelph 23 years ago, through my advocacy in supporting local sustainable food systems, and now in my role as a political leader for the Green Party of Ontario. And, you know, just to put in perspective a little bit, so if you look out these windows, almost the majority of Ontario's prime farmland you can see from the top of the CN Tower. And we are losing 350 acres a day in Ontario, the size of the city of Toronto. So if we don't protect prime farmland and prevent Doug Ford from doing things like opening the Greenbelt up for development, how are we going to feed ourselves? If we don't expand the Greenbelt to include the Blue Belt to protect our river systems in Ontario, how are we going to find the clean drinking water that not only sustains life, but sustains our economy? And if we don't tackle the climate crisis, how are we going to deal with both the economic, social, and human risks associated with it? And so that's the future I'm fighting for. And I think that's the future that reflects the values of most people in Ontario. And so the challenge I face is to earn people's trust and earn their respect, and then earn their vote, that it is possible to move forward in a better way.
You're kind of whipsawed between you don't get enough votes, so you don't get the attention and exposure of debates, and you don't get on the debates and exposure because you don't get enough votes. So what would you tell people, since you're probably the least known, albeit almost the most senior of Ontario political parties, tell Ontarians 2 or 3 things about yourself that they may not know.
Me personally?
Yeah.
Well, I think the first one would, I mean, first of all, I'm a father and a husband, and I think most people may or may not guess that, but family and community life is really important to me. Secondly, I think the thing people would be most probably interested in is the fact that I'm an entrepreneur and a small business owner, because it isn't what people usually associate with the leader of the Green Party. They would probably think of me more as an environmental activist. And so I've started 2 local food businesses in Guelph. And I've started nonprofit organizations promoting local sustainable food and farming. And so, you know, I know what it's like to risk capital. I know what it's like to create jobs. And I know what it's like to meet a monthly payroll. And, you know, people may not associate with that with a green leader. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about Ontario embracing a new economy, because I see the economic opportunities. And then that leads me to my next point. You know, sometimes people think that if you believe in protecting farmland and water, people and places we love in Ontario, you want to take action on the climate crisis, you want to make sure that we reduce pollution, that somehow you're anti-business. And I think the fact that I am an entrepreneur and a business owner, I want to just crush the whole myth that somehow there's competition between the environment and the economy. Because as I've said over and over again, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but the jobs of the 21st century are good, well-paying green jobs.
One last question from me. You were born in Kansas?
I was, yes.
So you've probably read Thomas Frank's book, What's the Matter?
I have,
Kansas?
yes, I have.
Sets out the proposition that a lot of Republican states, often with the lowest income levels and the worst pollution, tend to be the most ardently against government and against the EPA in the states and things like that. You sometimes, or I seem to suspect that the same phenomenon is duplicated here, where you get people who have very little that, say, Doug Ford offers is actually going to help them in much degree, to much extent, and they end up voting, essentially voting against their own interests. Do you find that to be a phenomenon, and how do you address that?
Well, I think one of the reasons Doug Ford backtracked so fast from his Greenbelt comment was that it exposed him for what he is. You know what? He promised to open the Greenbelt behind closed doors to benefit his wealthy friends and developers with deep pockets who are donating to the Conservative Party. And I think when his true colors were exposed, he had to backtrack because this public backlash exposed him for who he is. And you know what? The bottom line is he goes around and says he supports small businesses. Well, you know what? He's offering tax cuts for Bay Street corporations and the biggest corporations in this country. He's not offering cash flow relief for small businesses like the Green Party is. He doesn't stand up for the little guy. We're the party that's actually standing up for small businesses, for people with modest and middle incomes, for affordable housing. I didn't got into affordable housing yet today, but our affordable housing plan actually says, you know what? 20% of any new housing development in Ontario should have a minimum, any new development should have a minimum 20% affordable housing units, so young people can afford a place to call home, so seniors can stay in their homes. To me, that's fighting for people, not well-connected insiders. And so at every opportunity I have, you know, I want to expose that, and I want to talk about it, and I want to show people how we are fighting to put people first and how we can do politics differently in a way that puts people first.
We're getting a lot of interest from viewers about your comments on public funding of the Catholic School Board.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, that's a very controversial issue.
Is that part of your platform now, to end public funding of the Catholic
Yeah, it's been part of our platform for many years. And so if you go into our vision book, we didn't put it into our 9 platform commitments. And the reason is I think the reallocation of that money is not going to happen in the next 4 years, because it's going to take a while for the integration to happen, and it has to happen in a way that is respectful of students who are currently in separate and public schools, and we have to do it in a way that transitions teachers and educational assistants into the new integrated system. So it's going to take some time, and we want to reflect the fact that it takes some time in our costing documents. But yes,
have a 5-year plan to phase in carbon.
Well, that's a much easier thing. That's a much easier transition to make. Because I mean, here's the thing: is you know, there are students in grade 1 right now that are in the separate school system, and you have to think about how integration is going to affect those students. in those families, and you have to make sure the integration is done in a way that minimizes any disruption to those families. Because even if it provides long-term benefit for Ontario, and I believe it will, I mean, the financial savings alone are estimated between $1 to $1.6 billion, which, you know, from our perspective should go back into education to support hiring more teachers, education assistants, etc. But you have to do it in a way that minimizes disruption in individual, like student and family lives. And so that's why it's going to take time to do it. But you know what? You have to. I believe we have to start now. We have to start the conversation now and figure out what is the best way to integrate the two systems.
I'm afraid we've actually run out of time now. I want to thank you for coming. We really appreciate the time that you've given us. And for everybody that's watching, our next meeting is May 22nd with the NDP leader, Andrea Horvath. Thank you again very much, Mike, for coming in.
Well, thank you, and I really appreciate the good questions and the tough questions, and I appreciate the opportunity to spend an hour with all of you. And thank you for the good work that you do.